Hey everyone. I think this is going to be the first video in my new channel called MicroQuesting Mastery. And I'll probably get into what I think MicroQuesting is in another video, but this is just nothing crazy here. This is just an informal way for me to share ideas that might be helpful to people. And, even if one person watches the video or some shorts or whatever I put up here, and it's useful to your life in some way, then that's a worthwhile outlet for my creativity. Um, so, what my buddy, he's far more versed in videos and podcasts and all that kind of thing. And he does it professionally. And he was telling me that I should just, um, I go on a lot of hikes, and so I get really pretty pictures of nature. And he said, you know what, just put up a pictures or some cool pictures of nature and just start posting and start talking about ideas that matter to you and that are helpful to people. So I'm going to do that. And the first thing I want to talk about is the title I came up with it is called "Don't Share Your Vision," and the subtitle is "Encouragement for and Wisdom for People Who Dream Big," which seems contradictory, but it isn't if you get into what I'm about to share. So, growing up, we're often asked, "What's your dream job? What's your dream for the future? And another life, what could you be?" Asked this all the time in school. Sometimes it's an icebreaker question at work, whatever, right? But we got asked it all the time. We're also taught that, we should believe in ourselves and that we can pretty much do anything we put our minds to. But that's not reality. The truth is that society wouldn't function if everybody was a doctor or a lawyer or an astronaut or future president. That's not all of us, right? And that's okay. That is okay. So, for me personally, when I was in high school, I thought I knew exactly what I was going to do with my career. I had all of these dreams, and I had it all laid out from basically the moment I was 18 and graduated high school till I retired in my 60s. I had my whole life plan figured out. And, I got into college and I started that, and it lasted about 2 weeks. So, in that, I learned a few things, right? And what I learned is that um, things are way more challenging than we think they are in our heads. In our minds, we kind of have this very romanticized version of whatever we're aspiring for. Um, but the reality is until we actually go out and do that thing, whether maybe you get an entry level opportunity at that job, or maybe you get an internship, or whatever, right? But until you get a real taste for what that kind of thing is, you don't actually know whether you like it or not, and you don't actually know if you're any good at it. So you can have all the heart, excuse me. We're taught, have heart. And yeah, you need heart. But the reality is it's not just heart. If you aren't prepared for it, if you aren't mentally ready for it, and you won't know until you're in it, you can't necessarily just magically gut it out. I know, like in a lot of movies and TV shows and whatever, the hero just magically guts it out. And yeah, humans are capable in the moment for some pretty incredible things. But the reality is if you're not prepared, you can't just magically have it come out of nowhere. No matter how strongly you have this sense of destiny of, oh, this thing is what I'm meant to do. Maybe, maybe not. So there's a more painful lesson I learned from having my plans fall apart within 2 weeks of starting college. And what happened was, fast forward a few years to my senior year of college, I was chasing a career opportunity that actually involved some overseas humanitarian aid work, and I was pretty excited for that. And I was initially accepted, and it was a very thorough vetting process that included medical and background check and all that. And I was initially accepted. I passed my background check and my legal clearance, and then with my medical, I started having things come up. Nothing out of the ordinary, but this particular organization was very, very particular about certain things. And so they kept delaying my clearance or reassigning me to a different post, a different job. And I kept having to wait. And this season of waiting lasted about 4 years before I finally decided this isn't going anywhere. I'm wasting my youth. This organization isn't really a good fit for me. And that was a really painful thing to give up on. And it was painful for a number of reasons, right? So, since this was an opportunity I was pursuing for 4 years, I would have tons of people just in various social circles come up and ask me and say, hey, weren't you going to do this thing? And then with each person, I would have to explain to them why it didn't work out. And you feel like a failure. Even in my case, when I had a good reason to just say, you know what, this isn't worth it anymore, and I want to move on, even when intellectually you understand that that's the right thing to do, it still hurts and you still feel like a failure. And then you're just burned out. You're ready to give up and on just life in general and doing anything. So it's really hard when that happens. But it's life. It does happen to all of us. And the other thing that hurts is I started to form my identity around this thing because it was my dream. It was what I was going to do. I was on the path, right? But it didn't work out. And so now suddenly this thing that I thought I was going to be doing for the next 2 years of my life, this thing that I thought was a part of my identity and my calling from God for my life, at least at that point, well, that was taken away from me. And so what's left? So these failures hurt, but as much as they hurt, they were formative because God opened doors and provided once-in-a-lifetime work opportunities that I never thought I'd have, right? I was in this unique situation where I thought I was going to leave the country to do overseas work in the matter of a year plus. So I couldn't go get a permanent full-time job, couldn't go get a lease on an apartment. So I was in this weird situation where I was living with my folks and I was doing temp work. But what happened was God provided a really unique opportunity in that. I had in college, I had an unpaid internship that actually turned into a full-time job with a prominent government official that liked me and knew that this was kind of where I was headed. And so in this temp full-time job as a junior political staffer, I was maybe 21, 22 at the time. I was thrown into this really crazy project where it was a $20 million government food assistance project for senior citizens during COVID. And I was helping manage the program. And I barely knew how to file my own taxes at the time. And here they just gave me this huge thing. And yeah, it was overwhelming and I was way in over my head, but it was a huge growth opportunity. And I only got it because, the opportunity I was originally pursuing made me wait. After that, I transitioned out of government, and my current job, more on the world of nonprofit, It only came about because, I was talking with a friend and he said, hey, you should take grant writing classes so you can learn how to write grants. Every nonprofit needs people that can do that. So I took a professional certification class online in grant writing, and I actually had to take a step back professionally. Like I said, I was still living with my parents at this time, and the organization I had my eyes on, where I work now, didn't have any job postings at the time. But I thought, you know what? I had a little money saved up. I wasn't paying rent. So if I could just start from the bottom and get another internship again, I could just bust my butt and they give me an opportunity. And eventually they got the funding for my old position and they brought me on. And so I look at that and I realize, man, that was just God providing in a way that I didn't think he would and I wasn't necessarily expecting him to, but I'm grateful for. And looking back, high school me, fresh out of high school, freshman in college, thought I had my whole life figured out, only to find that's not the case. I would have looked at some of these past job opportunities I've had in the last 5 or so years and thought, I would have never picked that out. And yet, through failure, through not making it in certain ways, I got to do some pretty cool things. And my old me might have written them off just because they weren't part of my narrow, specific vision. So these opportunities were unique because it taught me to be open. In college, I had a mentor. She was kind of an eccentric character, but she was really good to me. And she taught me that I had to stop being stuck in the future, that I had to live in the moment. I had to be more flexible, more spontaneous, and I had to be willing to take more worthwhile risks. A lot of these opportunities, both in my personal life and professionally, happened just because I thought something was kind of interesting and I just figured I'd roll with it. And I tried it out and I learned as I went. It wasn't what I studied for my major, it's not what I got my degree in, but it was the opportunity that was given to me, and so I just had to figure it out. But what that did is that gave me tangible experience. And so as I've reshaped my vision personally for what I want to do with my career, it's not just hypothetical, oh, well, I think I like this because of that. It's more of, okay, well, now I have some substance to my dream. I've done some things. I've tried some things. I've put myself out there. So now as I'm forming a vision for what I want to do with my future, I actually have an understanding of what I'm capable of, and what I've done, who I like working with, who I don't like working with, what I like doing, what I don't like doing, and what am I decent at? And the truth is I'd be lying if I had to say that I'm perfectly happy with where I am now and that I'm living my dream life. I'm not. I'm doing some cool stuff, but some of my dreams are just still dreams. And that's okay. In a hero's journey, we focus on the climax of their life's work, and we forget about all the years of failures and lessons learned that led up to it. If you watch a movie, they kind of fast forward through that part. But you think, I'm a Christian, and so a lot of the analogies I'm going to draw in the videos I make come from my faith. And this isn't to shove it down your throat. But this is just a part of who I am and how I understand the world. And so, yeah, you know what? I'll throw in things here and there that are helpful illustrations. And so one of them is if you look at the life of Jesus, the Son of God, yeah, he was born at Christmas, right, when we celebrate Christmas, and he lived his worldly life, but it wasn't till he was in his early 30s that he ultimately died on the cross for the sins of humanity. That's a long time to just live on earth. And obviously, I don't want to compare any mortal person to the Son of God, but that illustration is just to show that for us as creations of God, whatever our life work is meant to be on this earth, it may be years and years and years before we even realize what God is doing to form us as people through our failures, through our struggles, through our successes. And it won't be until we look backwards that we really can make any sense of it, if we do. And because of that season of waiting, regardless of how strong of a sense of destiny you may have, regardless of how strong you think your calling is, you have to be comfortable with who you are before you become that person, even if you become that person at all. You have to be comfortable with who you are right now to the degree that you can. And you have to start making changes in your life that are applicable to who you are right now, not some version of you think you might be 10 years from now or 20 years from now, whatever. There are people that live very simple lives and they're content and they live full of purpose. There's also people who have grandiose ambition, but it's never enough for them, right? So kind of a weird thought experiment that I think of is look at like Napoleon or Genghis Khan, right? These conquerors that we read about in history books, or you see some documentary on YouTube about them or something like that, right? These are guys that conquered half of the known world, led brutal campaigns of conquest that killed countless people, not just soldiers, but civilians, women and children, and it was never enough for them. Their pursuit of human glory was never enough for them. And the funny thing is now in modern history, we might think, oh yeah, they must have been pretty famous to be in a history book, right? But if you were Genghis Khan and you conquered the world, fast forward, if you knew that all was left of your legacy was, some artifacts in a museum, a blurb in a history textbook here or there, maybe you got a couple documentaries of you. If you are a conqueror of the world and that's all that's left of your legacy, you'd be pretty pissed, wouldn't you? But that's the thing. Human glory is fleeting. And we might think it's something, but to them, it's never enough. And with enough time, it's gone. So something that we can learn from that is that contentment does not indicate a lack of drive or vision. So the truth is like, we live our lives utterly in God's hands, whether we want to admit it or not. That's just my belief. And we can have hopes and aspirations, and some of us are a little more visionary than others, right? But anything we dream of can be taken away at any time. When I was in high school, there's a guy I grew up with who later died in a car crash when he was 22 years old. And so I was around the same age, and I was at his funeral, and I heard this really powerful eulogy that his family member gave, and heartwarming testimonies just from his family and people that were affected by the positive life that he led. And it's sad because he was 22. He could have done so much more with his life had it ran its natural course. But it was also very clear that he was deeply loved by many people and that he loved other people well. So I think, if I were to die tomorrow, who would show up to my funeral? What would they say? Would I be known for my faith? Would I be known for how well I treated the people around me, whether they're easy to love or hard to love? Would the world have been a better place for me having existed versus not? And so we have to be content and we have to live in the moment, not for selfish indulgence. When you hear live in the moment, we obviously think like, oh, go party, go wild, whatever. Just blow all my money and nah, ball out. Not necessarily. There's a time to ball out, and I'll do a video on that. But broadly, it's contentment with oneself in the current season of life you're in is not meant to be self-indulgent, but it's meant to be of service to others in the capacity that you can. And so we want to do that because, we're all going to die at some point. And so then when we have to go meet our maker, we want to show, hey, I did something with my life. So I'm Presbyterian, and an interesting piece of theological literature from my faith background is the Westminster Shorter Catechism. And it says something to the effect that the chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. So we realize, like, if anyone is earnestly pursuing Christ, they can do it regardless of their walk of life or how far they are in their personal journey. It doesn't matter. If that is the intent and if that is how they live out their lives, they're doing it. A janitor who serves God by doing their job well and being kind to people is glorifying God just as much as someone who is the CEO of a nonprofit and is, saving starving people halfway across the globe or something like that. In the eyes of God, it's like, are we coming to him with a heart that's willing to serve and honor him in whatever capacity we're given? So that's meant to comfort us and to humble us, because we realize that human existence isn't really to serve our own purpose. It's actually to serve God's purposes. And that's not meant to be stifling. That's actually meant to set you free, right? We realize that anything we're meant to achieve is on God's timing and it's according to his sovereign will. We can just live our normal lives. Some of us more normal, some of us do get lucky and do some crazy things. But regardless, we can serve him where we're at. We don't have to be like Genghis Khan or Napoleon and go conquer half the world and cause immense amount of destruction and pain for human glory that will ultimately amount to nothing. And that's an extreme example, but how, in our own lives, we look at celebrities and look at all the things in this world that people are chasing. And sure, money's nice, success is nice, all that's nice. But it's so fleeting. It's so fleeting. And if that's what a person lives for, is that really a life well lived? I don't think so. But I felt that whatever this vision that was on my heart at the time, I felt like I had to be the one that had to go and get it done. I had to do it all in my strength. I had to do it by myself. And you hear that a lot in modern culture. And I thought that if I wasn't doing it, that I was a failure to God. So, and as I've grown up, I've realized that this is it's a backwards notion, right? Like, it's only because of God's grace and power that I can pursue any kind of ambition. And if he wants me to succeed in the moment, I will. And if he wants me to learn from a failure, then I also will. So, does it make being a visionary bad? No, not really. But someone who has a vision needs the spiritual humility to submit it to the Lord, and also to have to be practical and to work towards it without talking the talk before they've walked the walk. So, in a practical sense, for me personally, I don't really tell people what my dreams or career goals are. And most of us, when we're kids and we grow up, we have these wild dreams. I remember in elementary school, someone saying, I want to be an astronaut. I want to be the president. I want to be the governor, whatever, right? And so millions of kids around the world, millions upon millions, have these kinds of dreams. And for most of us, we grow out of them and we move on with our lives. And, we find work that's gratifying or not, but we do our best, right? But, I mean, somebody has to do it. So at least for a small handful of these folks, whatever crazy dream they have, it does end up becoming true. So, but the thing is if you hold on to a vision like that, whatever it may be, you know, people think you're a little goofy for that, maybe a little immature. So if you do have an ambitious dream that you're chasing and that you're holding on to and you believe is given to you by God, there's a couple things you need to do. One is to shut up. don't tell anyone. If that is what you're going to do, don't tell anyone that you're going to do it. The other thing is to know the difference between a vision and a fantasy. So a vision is an actionable plan that is rooted in reason, and you are taking small steps to move towards that goal. A fantasy, on the other hand, I define that as an imaginary conceptualization of oneself that a person uses to escape reality. So, like, escapism's fine. There's a place for it. Video games are fine, in moderation. I enjoy them. I used to be a pretty big gamer growing up. But if you're hiding in a fantasy because you don't like where you are and you're scared to build a vision, then that fantasy is just going to hold you back. It's a sweet poison that will kill you over time, whereas a vision is a bitter pill of medicine that is chock full of failures and doubts and reality checks and hard work, but it's ultimately what keeps you on the path. So an example of this is, I'm super into anime and video games and the such. So growing up as a kid, I watched a lot of Naruto, which is, it's about ninjas and stuff, and it's fun if you watch it. Just skip the filler episodes, but it's this fantasy anime world where you see all kinds of badass ninjas who are strong and they lived out their ideals. They got in these crazy fights and stuff, and they'd be coughing up blood and they get wild, right? But they're strong and they powered through, and actually a lot of great lessons to be learned from a show like that. But I saw those flashy visuals, the athleticism as they're sparring and doing the taijutsu and the warrior culture. And so it became my fantasy world that I lived in. I didn't have a great home situation at the time. And so it was my fantasy world that I escaped to. And it really became unhealthy when I just wanted to live in their world and come home from school and get on my family computer and watch Naruto. Literally, all day until I was told, hey, go do your homework. Or as soon as my homework was done, I'd watch it until dinner. And then until my folks would kick me off and say, hey, go to bed or go do something else. It was to escape. And then as soon as I turned it off, I wouldn't, because I hated the reality I was trying to escape from. But God did something really cool in that time. When I was about 15, I had a family friend that told my mom, hey, you should get your son into judo classes. And so, judo was kind of cool. It wasn't like the flashy choreography I saw in Naruto, but it's close enough, right? It was pretty cool. And for those of you who don't know judo, I'd look it up, but it's a Japanese martial art descended from traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. It's kind of in the same like umbrella system of like Brazilian jiu-jitsu, traditional Japanese jiu-jitsu. You have judo in there, which is more like focused on throws. Very similar to wrestling, a lot of crossover. It's a really cool art, and I recommend you look into it. And I thought it was cool. And so I got signed up for some kids classes. Sensei Randy ran them, and he ran them out of this makeshift dojo in his backyard. When I first went as a kid, some angsty teenager, I thought it was kind of weird. But hindsight, I'm like, oh no, it's actually hecka dope. And I didn't learn anything flashy, and I wasn't good at it. I struggled just to do a somersault. Took me a long time to be able to do that. I'm not a naturally coordinated person. I was pretty clumsy. And I was always bigger. I'm a big guy. I was always been big for my age, and so I didn't move well. It was hard. But I kept showing up, and I kept busting my butt. Even if I sucked at it, I kept learning the basic movements, kept drilling them, kept trying. And it wasn't something I was super thrilled with. I wasn't doing any flashy moves that let me go beat up people, but it was cool. So I kept at it. And eventually, after some time of training that, Sensei Randy, he emailed my mom, and he told her that I had outgrown those classes and that I should start training in adult classes. That there was an actual dojo in town that one of his former students, who was a 5th degree black belt, he had actually started his own dojo in town, focused on training adults at a higher level. And so towards my last year of high school, he actually referred me over to him to train. And so I was ecstatic because I got my first real martial arts gi. I got the belt, and I got to train in a real dojo. And the people were nice too. But it was hard. I almost passed out during the conditioning. I sucked at doing rolls. And they had me doing all kinds of other things. It took me twice as long as other students at my level to learn any techniques. And I remember my first time getting thrown. I had the wind knocked out of me. And I was scared of doing what's called a sutemi, which is or stemi, which is like a self-throw, where you basically throw yourself midair, flip in the air, and you land on your back. It was hard stuff for me. But I was supported. I was in an environment where I was encouraged, and I knew that as long as I kept showing up and I kept doing the work, that I had a path of progression laid out for me. So at that point, I was at a crossroads, right? I could go back to my family computer, turn on Naruto, and I could be comfortable and hide in my little fantasy world of ninjas and whatever, and escape, or I could be in reality, and I could go to the dojo where I knew I was going to sweat, where I was going to feel pain, get slammed into the ground, get the wind knocked out of me, do hard things, push myself. I mean, anyone getting flipped in the air, midair, and then landing, that's scary. So it's not like it was easy going to classes, and I wasn't always in the mood, but I knew that if I would go and I'd come home sore and bruised and whatever, but that was real. That was real, and if I kept at it, I could be on the path of becoming a judoka, a real-life judoka, and that's about as close as I was ever going to get to becoming a real-life ninja. So I took it. And 12 years later, I ended up taking my preparatory test for my black belt exam. And that was just 2 hours straight of demonstrating throws and pins and sweeps and takedowns. And physically and mentally, it was the hardest thing I've ever done in a long time. But 15-year-old me would have looked back on that and been amazed. He would have never thought that a version of himself years down the line could even do any of those things. And so, it's also important to have a reality check. So I'm actually, despite all the years of training, I'm not actually that good of a judoka for my skill level. I could be in better shape. I'm not as limber or as agile as other judoka. Most legit martial artists could kick my butt. One time I had a privilege of training with a Team USA Olympic black belt judoka, and we were doing what's called randori. And it was terrifying because I knew he was literally, he was going so easy on me. He was just letting me toy with him. And he could destroy me like that if he wanted to. And that's just being honest. That's not me being humble. That's the reality of it. And that's okay. And so I have a real vision and with real potential and real expectations just based on where I'm at. And I'm on the path. And that's what matters. And so that's the difference between a fantasy and a vision. And so, we can think about what things are we doing in life that we're using as fantasy escapism, and what can we do to turn those things into a vision? How can we turn our lives from running away and playing video games to making our life a real life video game that we enjoy as much as we can? So what is next for me? What is next for my plan? I'm not going to tell you. That's the whole point of this. I'm not going to tell you. Because going back to earlier, once you have a real vision, the best thing you can do for yourself is to shut up and not blab about it. Because like I mentioned, with the overseas opportunity I was pursuing at the end of college, it hurt deeply to have to walk it back with the tens if not hundreds of people that I talked to about it. Had I just not really gone into that much detail with anybody about what I was planning, I could have walked it back a lot more easily. It wouldn't really cost me as much, because then I don't have to go and tell everyone and their dog that this thing that I was going to do, I failed at. And it's important to move back past failure and somewhat quickly, because I fail a lot, right? There's the old adage you hear, if you're not failing, you're not trying, right? So a vision has to be fluid, and it has to be able to change, because if you're really putting yourself out there, you're going to fail a lot. And so you have to be willing to go with the flow and adapt and change your vision. And so when I don't tell that many people what I'm doing, when I keep my cards close to my chest, I can just go after whatever vision I'm pursuing wholeheartedly, and I'm free to fail as much as I need to go and make it happen. And the other reason to shut up about your dream is that, sometimes people think it's ridiculous, right? You look at anyone who's famous who's done anything remarkable, they've had haters, they've had doubters, and it's not all hate. Some people genuinely care and say, hey, you know what? That's a bit of a pipe dream, right? And they're not necessarily wrong, but if you keep your cards close to your chest, you just go out there and get after it. And here's the truth, right? Most people don't care all that much, right? Like, they're nice, and people will offer their 2 cents, but they're not really buying into your personal vision and what you want to do with your life. Sometimes, but most of the time, not really. Like if you're at a party or something and it's casual conversation, people may ask, but they don't really care. For them, it's just a conversation point. And so if that's the case, you don't really owe anyone that much of an explanation. You can be very general or vague and just say, hey, I'm still figuring it out. Or I'm looking into different things. And maybe I have a general interest in this thing, but you don't have to get specific. You do need to let some people in, though, right? And the more that a person takes a genuine interest into your future, and the more they're willing to help and maybe offer a resource, maybe they're in that field you're interested in, and they're willing to talk to you about their work, or they're willing to bring you along, or maybe help you get some kind of opportunity. To the degree that someone's willing to do that, okay, let them in, because they're actually going to do something. So what's good is maybe you have 2 or 3, or maybe a little more, but like a really tight circle of people that you actually let know what you're doing. The people you trust the most. They won't tease you for having a crazy vision, but they're also going to keep you grounded, and you trust them to speak truth into your life and be realistic with you. And they'll hold you accountable, and they'll be honest with you about where you're really at. Not necessarily where you think you are, but that's the only people you really need to let know what you're up to. And the other thing too is by walking the walk first, it keeps you accountable. One of the things I hear all the time, particularly with younger folks, like, high school age, college age, right? They'll say, oh, I'm a future whatever. I'm a future scientist. I'm a future lawyer. I'm a future doctor, whatever. Or we say, I'm going to do blank, right? And when you're doing that, what it's kind of doing is you're almost taking a loan on the credibility of whatever you're trying to achieve without actually having achieved it. It makes you feel good. It kind of gives you this sense of status before you've actually gone and done it. And the problem with that is, one, there's no guarantee you can actually go and do it. But two, it almost is a form of self-sabotage because it gives you that good feeling without actually having to go and do it. So then it actually takes away from the impetus to go and really walk that walk. So that's just my thoughts, right? In closing, just, if you have a vision, have a tight circle of people you trust to speak truth into your life, to bounce ideas off, people that can help you build that vision. Be okay with it failing. Be okay with it changing. Be okay with giving up on it if God leads you to. Don't give up just because it's hard. But when it's no longer worthwhile, you gotta do what you gotta do. And don't tell anyone. Don't tell your larger social circle that's what you're doing. Keep it to yourself. Most people don't need to know. Give it your all. And then also start chipping away, right? Going back to the judo analogy, I wasn't going to be doing flips and chokes and takedowns and throws and pins and all kinds of crazy stuff. I wasn't going to do that my first week of class, right? Something my martial arts instructor told me is if you want to learn the secrets of any martial arts system, show up to a beginner class. It's just the fundamentals, but perfected over time and practiced and repeated and drilled down, and then built on that with more and more levels of sophistication and advancement. But it's just the fundamentals, right? So whatever you're trying to do, build a plan, chip away at it a little bit of a time, keep your head down, don't tell anybody, and be okay with it changing. And understand that who you are right now, that you are an image bearer of God, you are worthy, and that, you know what? If you were to die tomorrow, you still have a legacy that you can leave, and you still have purpose. So don't get stuck in the future, because you won't know the future until you get there. Be present in the moment with who you are, and just do your best. And that's the most anyone can ask of you. So that's this idea. I might share some other ideas later, and probably shorter videos, just on anything that's helpful. So yeah, stay tuned.